Okay, welcome everybody to AutoMobility Advisors webinar on enterprise business intelligence before artificial intelligence. This is a foundational topic for the success of artificial intelligence within the automotive industry, and we're here with some special guests to talk about that. Thank you for all joining, taking time out of your lunch hour or your morning or your evening. And this will be recorded. So if anybody wants to watch it again later, we can allow you to do that. We'll send that to everybody after the call. So thanks for joining. And while we wait for a few more folks to join, feel free to mark in the chat where you're from, where you're calling from, so we have an idea of people from all over. And I'll introduce myself and then we'll introduce our guests as well along the way. So my name is George Ayers. I'm the managing director of AutoMobility Advisors. We're a boutique consulting firm focused on automotive technology and helping clients and other companies connect on those topics and improve their business and grow their business using automotive technology. So we're very excited to be talking about this topic because we've had a lot of internal conversations about AI and automotive and what's happening in automotive and all the projects. And we always come back to the same thing, which is there's some foundational ideas that also need to be in place to make all of that work. And we feel like that's a great topic for us to talk about today. And I have some special guests here. In fact, the A team, I'll call them. So we have Asim Lalani from Strategy Software. Welcome, Asim. We have Anoop Tiwari from AutoMobility Advisors. Welcome, Anoop. And we have Alan Levinson from AutoMobility Advisors. Welcome, Alan. And again, as we have people assemble, Alan, why don't we start off? And maybe you can kind of inform us all about the white paper and the material that we created a couple of weeks ago about this topic that's available to everybody and what that was all about. And maybe that gets us started on the conversation. And again, for everybody's benefit, the white paper is available at automobilityadvisors.com. You can go there and download it. In fact, follow along perhaps during the conversation. So, Alan?
Great. Thanks, George. Nice to meet everybody. Alan Levinson, Director of Data and Analytics at AutoMobility Advisors. And just to context, my background includes General Motors, Asbury Automotive, so that I'll be coming from that perspective. So as George said, we've been working on a white paper that we put out several weeks ago, same title, Enterprise Intelligence Before Artificial Intelligence. Listen, we all know AI is the technology of our generation. There are just an enormous amount of projects and pilots. Boards are demanding it. Leadership teams are focused on it. In our industry, it's agents to help set appointments in the sales department or in the service departments at the dealerships. It's predictive analytics for warranty management, leveraging connected vehicle data, inventory management. It's across the board. So we were at the National Auto Dealers Association, NADA, in Vegas a couple of weeks ago. Our exhibit was in the North Hall, which is kind of the newer companies that get in the North Hall. I don't know, if there were 200 companies there, I would say 190 were talking about AI and probably about 180 of them using agents as part of what they do. And the truth is, data is the foundation for all of this. And in order to get it to work, you need to get the data right and you need to get that foundational architecture right. Most of the companies these days, they've either moved fully to the cloud or they're certainly in the process of moving partially hybrid or fully to the cloud. A lot of companies now utilizing tools to help with the data like Snowflake and Databricks. But what we're seeing is, cloud compute costs are rising. There's a lot of that. As is typical in early phases with technology, the results are not always there, and that includes a lot of these AI initiatives. So people are kind of seeing that they're spending more on compute than they are getting any real ROI. So that's kind of the focus of the white paper, getting it right, which means having the proper architecture so your data teams have the ability to implement AI at scale. That means combining siloed data sets. We'll talk more about that. Having the data be well governed and so who can get access to it, making it available on a repeatable basis. Huge issue. I'll talk a lot about that when we talk about General Motors and my experience there. Having the data stored in memory. So you're not always needing to tap the hyperscalers, the Azures, AWSs for every action to try and manage those sort of out of control costs. Asim will talk a little bit about that in further detail later. Having consistent definitions across the enterprise, the company. There's still a lot of Excel based spreadsheets with different metrics across departments. Changes are made, updates to the data. It doesn't flow through to the rest of the organization. Again, Asim will talk about that. We've got a lot of case studies from Porsche and others in the industry. So that's kind of the focus of the paper and really where we want to go deep today.
Super. Thank you, Alan. And Anoop, I think before we get in too deep, uh, we need to talk about automotive applications, right? There's dealers and OEMs, et cetera. Alan, you mentioned General Motors and some other examples. But there's an analytics focus as well that's kind of foundational. How does analytics support dealers, OEMs, tier ones, all the players in the ecosystem of automotive?
Absolutely. Just for context, I spent a couple of decades at Cars.com, Cars Commerce, or public company Cars Inc. And it works with about 19,000 dealers and provides online marketplace advertising, digital website services, and a whole host of offerings and vehicle acquisition and retailing. And my role there was around strategy, partnerships, M&A, but I also led customer analytics team for quite some time. And one consistent theme was this fragmentation of vendors across this retailer body. An average decent sized dealer might have 18 plus SaaS systems, and all of them will come with their own dashboards, their own reporting. So one of the challenges that any dealer would have is just which reports used for what purpose. There's an interesting study that Cox had done, Cox Automotive, which showed that 83% of dealers have reporting, but over half, I think 54% of them, had instances where they had conflicted data sets. So two different reports talk about two different things, right? So I think one of the mental models I have for this, again, simplistically, is this three C's model that you want your good analytics would result if you have these three things. One is around analytics to be contextual. So it has to be around what role someone is playing and it should be available when the decision is being made. The second level is around it being clear. So it should be obvious what it is stating. It should clarify why it's happening and what should be done, especially at operational levels, right? And the third C is around confidence building. So one should be able to trust the data. So every meeting doesn't become a debate about whose number is right and it leads to some action and decision. That's what matters, not just pretty reports.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anoop. And Asim, to bring you into the conversation, I just want to think about, we'll talk about how your company kind of organizes all this, I think. But my own experience, Alan mentioned the NADA show in February, lots of dealers now having access to AI, access to things that I don't think they had before. But also on the OEM side, the big company side in automotive, there's so much, to me, contrast between legacy systems companies have and new systems they have. And they're constantly trying to figure out how to access all of those systems. And I understand that strategy software has a kind of focus on something called the semantic layer, which your, I think, term is Mosaic, your solution for that. And that sounds really interesting about how to bring different things together. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Of course, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. And good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're tuning in from. So the semantic layer, right? This is a term there that Gartner and McKinsey's of the world are now kind of talking about. Every conference you're going to, somebody's talking about that. And I'll try to make it very simple. A semantic layer is really what I call context for your business, right? Um, and it's segmented into three parts. And I'll try to give you kind of what that means in the automotive world. So the first is semantic layer is all about definitions. How are you defining everything in your business, right? So, what is a customer? What is a car or a vehicle? What is a sale, right? It really sounds easy, right, to all of us, but it's difficult because when you walk into a customer, what does a sale really mean? Is a sale when a customer drives off the lot, or is it when the paperwork gets cleared? Or when the bank funds the loan, right? They are all three different answers for three different people or three different departments. The semantic layer locks that in across all your systems. That's number one. Number two is a fancy term that people are using these days. It's called ontologies. And it's a very simple idea. And in very simple terms, it's the way your business is organized, right? So now imagine that you have all the terms. What is a vehicle? What is a sale? But really, now you kind of go one level deeper. A vehicle is a kind of asset, right? A vehicle always has a model, always has a trim, a year, an engine type, right? Now, when you talk about the engine, an engine can be a gas, a hybrid, or an electric. A customer can own a car or lease a car, right? Or they can bring it in for service, right? These are the ground rules of how a business is set up, right? The AI needs to know the context, or it will just start comparing hybrids to electric vehicles. Last but not least is not everybody's talking about it, but that's where everybody's going. It's called something called the knowledge graph. Think of it as a giant family tree of sorts, but it is for your business, right? It connects everything to everything else. So let me give you an example. A customer has a vehicle. A vehicle is tied to a dealer is tied to a region to a recall campaign to a supplier. It's really one big web of how your business is really fitting together, right? Now, why does this matter right now? Why are we investing a strategy? Because we think about AI agents, we're thinking about OpenAI. We hear about Claude and Anthropic, and everybody's trying to use this on top of their raw data. The problem is the raw data is not context for your business, right? And LLMs and all these AI systems are going and fetching this raw data without context, right? Definition, then the semantic layer tells the AI context around your business, right? When you put all these things together, AI becomes just a lot more powerful than it already is. Now, very simple example. You go to AI, 2 plus 2 is 4. It's really trained on what I call general intelligence. But when you put AI on top of your enterprise data, your automotive data, it does not understand your business. And it's failing most of the time because it doesn't have that context. So semantic layer, context of your business, feeding it to AI.
That's great. Thank you. Super helpful. How do we think about the, let's call it tech stack in any of these situations, especially within automotive, as you mentioned, regions, factories, dealers, all the complexity of all that. How does a company actually think about where that semantic layer sits in their overall portfolio?
Yeah, that is a great question, right? So like, there's an interesting problem here. Every vendor either says they own the semantic layer, like everybody's owning it, but at the same time, it's nobody's owning it, right? And that is the problem today. And let me kind of give you an example. So we have all your data stack, right? This is where your raw data lives, right? Your sales records, your service tickets, your customer profiles, right? Warranty claims, they sit in your Databricks of the world and Salesforce of the world. Now, this is all raw data. And even though they're iterating that data to become business friendly, it's really technical folks, right, doing that for you. And it's not really useful in it by itself, right? And then you have your other systems, which are I call consumer systems. These are your AI systems, co-pilots, AI agents, right? Or even your dashboards, right? These are the downstream systems that are going to your source systems, right? To try to get answers. As I was mentioning, when you have that kind of stack, the top is your consumer stack, AI stack, BI stack, and data stack. The context of your business is either sitting across the board siloed, right? Or it is not present. Now, the semantic layer sits between the two, right? It's between the consumer layer and your data layer. Now, the point that matters, and most people don't realize is all these vendors are actually have semantic layers, but they're locked in those particular systems. The key point here is agnostic, right? AI is changing every 6 months. I used OpenAI 4 months ago. Now I'm using Claude. Who knows what I'll use next year, right? Vendors are negotiating deals. They're scared about not just data platform lock-ins. They're worried about LLM company lock-ins, right? Our vision is the semantic layer is one thing that has to stay contact or constant rather. So you can pick any data system, you can pick any LLM, you can pick any data tools or AI tools, right? If your semantic layer is separate in the architecture, your context is always preserved. That's where it sits. Between your data system, that becomes a commodity. Your LLMs and AI stack, you can flip them out like a light bulb.
No, that's great. And it's interesting, Asim, it reminds me of a corollary in the automotive world, which is all the control modules in a vehicle. I heard, for example, Jim Farley on a CEO of Ford on a LinkedIn webinar or something, or interview rather, talking about the legacy auto challenge relative to Tesla,
Yeah.
that his company has to figure out how to make 80 different modules from many different companies work together, whereas Tesla starts from, scratch and has everything the same. And I'm just thinking Jim Farley would really be happy to have a semantic layer in the vehicle right now, right? Um, so let's think about also those bigger companies, OEMs. Alan, I want to come to you. You had quite a lot of experience in the chief data and analytics office within one of the largest auto companies on the planet. How did that team, because what I'm thinking about is how things are today and how they're moving, right? So Asim's point about using the semantic layer to streamline and pull things together in context, that's different than how things are and how they've been. And so you have, I think, a good point of view on how they've been. Uh, can you tell us a little bit more about what those issues look like and how the big automakers can kind of think about how they need to change, even culturally, not just necessarily technically, right?
Sure. There's two pieces there. Yeah, there's sort of the data and then the culture. Let me handle both of those. You know, even before AI, the last couple decades, there's obviously been a lot of focus on data and the importance of that, and a lot of companies building centralized data and analytics functions. GM started on theirs in 2017. I joined early in 2018, so I think employee number 30. Initially, what's kind of interesting is this particular group, the real impetus was external monetization. I know you remember it, George, others do, the famed McKinsey study from 2016 saying, monetizing connected vehicle data. I forget the number, like a 500
750 billion, I think.
billion, not million, $1 billion opportunity. So that was actually the impetus. But when I got there, the focus pretty quickly moved to internal monetization, using the data to help the company be more successful, which is absolutely the right move. I would argue that at General Motors, the data is probably one of the harder challenges of any company in the world. That's a fairly big statement to make, but think about it. You have 100-plus-year-old company. They've insourced and outsourced the IT department how many times over that 100-plus years? So you have not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands of data sets that are siloed in different parts, many of them being outsourced. GM was an early player, the first in connected vehicles, an enormous database. People said one of the largest around, 15 plus million connected vehicles, thousands of data elements, pulling it down every 3 seconds, an enormous database. And really didn't know when we started what was in all of them. The data sets were not particularly well governed. They were not easily accessible. There was a major sort of almost 7, 8 year process to ingest all the data into the data lake. And that was an enormous project. And honestly, it was great because it gave us at least the chance to start using and leveraging the data. I know that the CTO would report back to Mary Barra, the CEO, every month. We've ingested 6,812. We're at 6,908. I mean, it was just a big to do. The cynic in me would say these were, data ponds as opposed to data lakes, this data set, this one, and they didn't always talk to each other. My responsibility, of course, was a lot on the marketing side, trying to know everything about our customer sales, service, F&I, and then be able to do AI-based communications, next best actions. And it was really hard. We did not have a unique identifier. You might have a VIN, but we certainly don't have it at the customer level. And that just made things worse because everybody needed it. So they would end up creating their own ID. The marketing team working with Axiom had one, the OnStar team, their own, only exacerbating it. So it was a pretty big challenge. So, the results were, as I mentioned, the focus from external to internal, absolutely the right decision. We found a lot of projects we were always having to start over, start from the beginning. The data was not reusable. A project would come up, we wouldn't have similar definitions of what the data was across groups and departments. We'd need to bring in data engineers, data scientists, data architects for each project. These people are expensive. They're hard to find. A lot of them live on the coast. Bringing them to Detroit was not a challenge, was not easy. We ultimately brought in a lot of talented folks from the outside. We upskilled a lot of very talented people on the inside and built sort of an entrepreneurial team within a large company. But what we found is, you call it data and analytics, 90% of the focus was always on the data, trying to bring it together. And I would go to conferences and I would hear the same thing. You just spent a small portion of your time on the analytics and just so much of it on the data.
Yeah.
The truth is, I left a couple of years ago. The group has been disbanded, which is sad. A lot of good people left. A lot of good people have moved into other areas of the organization. But I will tell you, the getting the foundational data was a huge issue. I don't want this to come across as a sales pitchy or anything, but I can tell you in my heart, I do believe if we had a cross-enterprise solution with a semantic layer so that the data was easily available and reusable and governed and cleaned, and that would have been a game changer and certainly essential, particularly going forward now to implement AI at scale.
No, thank you, Alan, and really good to hear how things have been. Before we get into how things can be and some examples of how they can be in the future, and you talked about General Motors ponds instead of lakes. I was thinking of data archipelago, for example. You've been in the business for a long time as well. Any other comments on how things have been, therefore telling us about what are we working with here, these big organizational challenges, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, we used to talk about data dictionaries. Asim, you'd remember
Mhm.
that. And that was sort of and nobody would work on those projects. That's sort of the reality uh, it'll keep sort of getting either deprioritized, or you'll have one person who'll build data catalogs, and that's where it stays. And the semantic layer, for which we now have really sophisticated tools and they can actually give us strong leverage, that layer basically sat in people's heads, and that's true even today. It's basically good analysts who know the context of the business. And when they finally generate a report, they can write a footnote or put an annotation, and that clarifies that, oh, actually, this means this and not this, right? This is how you should be interpreting. And I think we can all do better if we have any hopes of making it self-serve. We'll need to provide a better governance for all this middle layer. Otherwise, we'll all have a huge risk here because the tools are becoming easier and more accessible, and they'll just start spreading misinformation, hallucinations, incorrect conclusions, all kinds of things will happen.
Yep, yep. Thanks for that. And Asim, as we think about how things can be, I know Strategy has a current project with an automotive company, I think Porsche Cars North America, and they're employing some of these tools. What is the kind of problem they were solving? How did you guys think about it? And how did you put some things in place to help them?
Yeah, firstly, having Porsche as a customer is amazing. Right. We constantly visit them. Actually, they were at our show. They brought a car in. We were not allowed to touch it, but we have this joke is who owns a Porsche and who gets to drive a Porsche. So I'm still waiting for my turn.
All
So
right.
so hopefully that will come sooner than later. But you know what Porsche did, and you know I say this, they actually didn't look at it as a technology problem. They looked at it as a trust problem, right? And it was actually the after sales. So they have after sales service, right? And they have 200 dealers around the world, is essentially their headquarters in Germany. And when they were doing this, right, they found this issue where people were just not agreeing on numbers. And what do I mean by that? It wasn't just a number problem. So let me give an example. Customer satisfaction in service in Germany, right, is measured and captured differently than it is in the US because a survey inherently asks different questions.
Mhm.
Now, when they get in a room and talk about customer satisfaction, which is a big one for car makers, they can't even agree on like a main KPI, right? Another example, loyalty, right? What does loyalty mean? Does loyalty mean that they bought more Porsches, or are they still bringing in car for service? Right? Like that is not a definition. Anoop, to your point, this is like we're going into semantics now, right? And every month they were like getting into meetings and everybody was arguing, right? Instead of having a real conversations. How do I move the needle for my customer satisfaction? Or how do I actually increase my loyalty? So it was really a trust problem. So this is where they were using our semantic layer, they were using our BI layer as well. But I think as I look at the Porsche story, right? What popped out in my mind was they didn't actually solve this problem because they were implementing AI or while they were implementing AI. They actually solved this problem before they looked at AI. Now, why does this matter? The 2026 is a year of agentic AI, right? Where we think about like the experience that I as a consumer want to have, right? I have an agent running, my car's already due for service. Why can't like the Porsche agent talk to my agent, schedule it, get a pickup done? And like this is all manual work that I as a consumer have to do, where this all can be automated. Now, if you can't trust the numbers and things are hallucinating and you don't have a semantic layer, right? Difference between a human being, Asim, Anoop, George, is I can actually look and say, hey, you told me to pick up a car on Wednesday. You're going to show up on a Thursday. That doesn't make sense. But agents, they just take action, right? And those things actually compound over time. And in the world of agentic AI, right, what Porsche is doing is really setting themselves up for that world, essentially, right? That's why semantic layer is so important. It's not just about definitions anymore. It's about context of your business, how you're going to run, how are you going to actually elevate your customer delight, right? That's the world we're in. So that's what Porsche did, and really setting themselves up for a more, as we know, as Porsche is known for, more elevated, right, customer experience.
Super. Thank you. Really helpful. Appreciate that. And Anoop, another question for you as you've surveyed kind of the automotive landscape, and we talk about embedded intelligence or enterprise intelligence, as companies are ready to turn on their AI, what is really, good enterprise intelligence or embedded intelligence look like, in your experience?
Yeah, so I'll speak to it from the auto tech ecosystem perspective, and then maybe touch upon consumer side too. When we think about AI, of course, we're talking about the traditional definition of AI, not just the current version of Gen AI that's a lot more popular. And in the automotive category, at least three or four use cases have matured fairly. Um, it's become fairly sophisticated in the last, I would say, over a 10-year period now. The most prominent one that comes to mind is pricing analytics. So most franchise dealers now have some form of pricing analytics tools, which provides them guidance based on local market prices for similar cars. And depending on which tool they're using, it factors in the demand data, and it does a good job of giving them some guidance, which has basically changed how many dealers make decisions about pricing, how long they keep a vehicle at the dealership lot, and so on. There have been also a decent amount of progress, I would say, more recently around messaging. So, looking at customer data and providing some personalized messaging, not quite perfect, but has improved from what it used to be. Um, Alan talked about NADA, and this NADA, there were at least a dozen companies with some form of voice AI capabilities. And many of them are standalone companies, which are trying to get access to data from multiple systems that dealers have. And as we all know, they don't talk to one another. And many times it's difficult to know which one to use for what purpose. So that creates an issue. So broadly speaking, I would say in the tool world, as long as the problem is narrowly defined and it's handled by one vendor, they can deliver decent solution. But the moment you have to have um, a problem that needs to be solved by connecting multiple systems, four or five systems have to bring information together, you're expecting AI to magically sort of connect things, and even these tools when they're meeting it for the first time, many times, right? Like definition, Asim point an example about loyalty. A simple question like conversion rate, right? Like which source converts better? And the definition of what exactly is a lead. Do you count lead at a household level? Do you count duplicate leads? When the sale happens, are you considering the sale only for the lead, the car the lead was submitted on, or any sale is okay? If you're a dealer group, a sale happening at a different store than the one that the lead submitted, was that a sale or not? All those things are can lead to very different kind of interpretation of the exact same term, right? So whenever there are multiple systems involved, it routinely breaks. When there is a narrow definition of a problem, there have been more successes. That's how we've seen so far.
No, that's
Hey,
great.
George,
Yeah, go ahead.
do you mind if I add on to that? To what Anoop said, it was really interesting. We've talked about OEMs, a little bit about dealers. As we were working on the white paper, it was probably what, 3, 4 weeks of pulling it together. Admittedly, would probably taken longer without AI, but that's the world I think we all live in. As we were working on it, literally in the middle of it, three pretty interesting articles appeared in the trade journals from three very different areas of our industry, all talking about the exact same premise of the importance of getting the core architecture right. So I'll just hit a couple of them. It was pretty interesting. One first, of course, was dealerships, which we've talked a little bit about. I know a little something about it from my Asbury days, but was an interesting view I'd never thought of. We've been in sort of the consolidation for about 30 years now. I started out at about 25 early days, but it's been about 30 years. The author, the Intelligent Dealership, talked about how for most of that 30 years, the focus has been consolidating to get efficiencies from both a financial and particularly operational perspective. Rather than one dealership, take it across all. Fine. The argument that Todd made is that the future is about consolidating data and being able to do so to execute on AI initiatives, particularly for agents. I mean, if you think about the dealership world, it's still a lot of individual people at the dealership level doing a lot of stuff. It's hard to find people. We have very high turnover. We will never get to a fully automated system, but there is a lot of very good use cases for agents answering calls, helping with pricing, figuring out recalls. We have some clients today that are doing it very well. So I thought that was one interesting one. And by the way, doing that, to Anoop's point, it requires bringing your DMS data together, your CRM data, your inventory management data, advertising agency. There's a lot of consolidation, cleaning, governing that happens. So there's one. The second one came from a completely different world, from the supplier community, the tier one suppliers. In automotive news, and they cited some studies from Boston Consulting Group. If you think about it today, the supplier community is undergoing enormous pressure. I'd call it stress. Tariffs are having seemingly a outsourced impact on them. EV uncertainty. They've made huge investments, and it's obviously not happening. There's always the ever-present and ever-growing margin pressures from the OEMs. Now we've got overall demand growth with, the affordability, interest rates, negative equity. There's a lot of pressure on profitability. If one were to generalize, not every company, but you would say this is probably a space that's not been as quick to get to the world of data and AI. They're manufacturing. But the BCG's comments are, in order for these companies to remain competitive, and a lot of them will not, those that do will be the ones that pursue key priorities around data, technology, new domains such as software, robotics, which requires a lot of foundational data. AI absolutely will play an important role in operations and decision making. And they need people who understand software, data, and AI.
Yeah.
So very interesting view. The last one comes from the world of fleets. In Fleet Management Weekly, they were talking about how, listen, we know all these companies are focused on AI, software-defined vehicle, connected vehicle data. That's an area of particular interest for us at AMA. And it's one of the areas where fleets is one of the areas where telemetry, connected data really has been a success. But still, a lot of struggling on capitalizing on the underlying data remaining siloed, poorly integrated. The author talked about needing a, quote, extensible AI framework, or what he referred to as middleware, that serves as the golden source of truth. That is exactly what Asim has been talking about with Mosaic or the semantic layer. So it was just really interesting that while we're doing this, three very different parts of our world talking about the importance of getting that foundational architecture right before making it to the thriving in our current AI future.
Thank
you
you,
can add
Alan.
real quick, George, one
go ahead.
add-on point. Alan, the pattern that you talked about, especially in the dealer world, is there is a clear trend of consolidation. Dealerships that are larger have an advantage of scale and efficiency, and smaller, especially independent dealers, have been basically gradually fading away, the ones who are not able to compete. And in the past, you needed a much higher scale of operation to justify investments in data warehouse and having these advanced data catalog, data dictionary practices, and to extract full value from it. And that barrier is coming down now, right? The tools are becoming more accessible. The costs of setting up these setups also going down now. So it's really fascinating to see that it'll, in my opinion, only accelerate the consolidation towards better performing, slightly larger groups. And they have a perfect opportunity. I mean, if you look at the extreme examples like CarMaxes and Carvanas of the world, they are extremely sophisticated in their data practices. And they can basically connect the dot across the whole value chain and bring data together and perform at a different level. And everybody else has to set that as a bar and compete against them. So this is like the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anup. And SM, before I come back to you, I just want to ask one question that came up in my mind as you were talking, Anup and Alan, about a particular automotive situation. Whereas the OEMs and the automakers, they're scaling up, they're trying to figure out how to do this, get their data practices organized. Dealers are now also doing it more aggressively. They have more access. The barriers are coming down, as you mentioned. But historically, auto dealers and auto manufacturers have a hard time sometimes communicating. So what I'm curious about is as all this data is flying around, how that's going to be resolved, right? Because you still have that it's my customer, not your customer situation sometimes. So, yes, they have DMS at the dealer, they have other tools, and the automaker has its own portals, own systems. We know about automakers that send connected vehicle data to dealers every single day. And they say, here's all your customers with check engine lights on. What are you going to do about it? Right. And so they work with each other, but there's always a tension between the OEMs and the dealers. And how is that going to be different or maybe better solved because of some of this work that we're talking about? Any comments on the Alan or Anoop?
I have more comments on the issues than the solutions. I've lived it for decades. One of my major projects at GM was this whole customer 360, bringing all of our data together. And it was such a struggle getting the foundational data. And that was just all the data within GM. Never mind bringing in, to do it right, you need to bring in the data not only from the dealerships, but also from the cars.coms and all the others. I mean, think about how much money is spent on marketing at all the different channels, tier one, tier two, tier three. And you're right. There is a lot of tension. There's always concerns from the dealer world that the OEMs want to go direct and start selling pieces. And we know there's a lot there. There are efforts happening. You see some of the things that folks like Ford Direct are trying to do, and others to bring OEM and dealer data together. I will tell you that the folks that do it will absolutely be the ones that are successful. There's a lot of money spent right now on the on marketing from across the organization. Nobody really knows who's responsible for the sale. So if we had visibility to what's happening at each level, I think we'd be much, much more successful. Making AI truly happen and have this seamless experience for the customer. The whole online selling, we still haven't quite figured it out. What we do know is the answer is, for many people, a fully online sale probably isn't the answer, but it absolutely is one where it's a very integrated, seamless, all the work they do at home on their phone and computer. So when they show up at the dealership, it's quick. They know everything about you, all the work, and you truly do get in and out in 45 minutes. The OEMs and dealers that work together and figure that out, bringing the data together, they will be the winners.
Yeah, and this goes beyond a little bit from the scope of what analytics can solve for. I mean, it's a structural problem, right? Like the tier one, tier two, tier three working together has been a challenge for decades now. Analytics can certainly help. Sharing data across these tiers can certainly help. But we've always seen campaigns where Google AdWords campaign are competing for the same terms across tiers and outbidding one another for the exact same keywords,
Yeah.
right? Like those things don't make much sense. So I think sharing more data set will certainly be helpful there. But yeah, it's a real problem, no doubt about that.
No, thank you. Thank you. And Asim, so Anoop mentioned challenges. I'd like to get back to AI and what AI is all about. And thinking about these auto companies, right? You mentioned Porsche, but there's other auto companies. They have challenges with implementing AI.
Yeah.
What are the key challenges in your mind? And then how can they solve them through these tools like semantic layer?
Yeah, for sure. Before I go into challenges, maybe I'll use an example to just talk
Sure.
about challenges just to make it real. But I just want to hit on a couple of things here. I think when you think about semantic layer, right, we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And I think the perspective that I'd like to share is I think it's a very much a architectural decision before it's a feature function discussion, right? That's number one. And number two, I think as a consumer who buys cars and like, brand, right? I think Anoop mentioned this, right? There's structural challenges, right, that AI or technology in general cannot solve. But as a consumer, we want the same experience that we're having in other industries, right? Why do I have to walk into a dealership to buy a car, right? They don't want to share data, right? When a manufacturer shares data with the dealer, right? It's raw data. It's not, there's no context. So the dealers are left to do the work themselves. That's why they're not doing it, right? So it's a very much architectural decision, but also structural. Now, coming back to your question, scaling AI, right? I think across the board, we're seeing the same set of challenges. Now, let me try to make this real for you. So think of a CEO of a major car maker, right? Monday morning, she opens up her Copilot or AI assistant, and they ask one question: how is our new SUV performing this quarter? Very simple questions. Now, what happens when you don't have a semantic layer in the background? The first one is the challenge with cost. Everybody knows the AI costs are going up. Now, without the semantic layer, and I mentioned semantic layer is context for your business. Now, for this particular question, if AI doesn't know where to look, it just scans your entire database. Sales numbers, marketing numbers, finance reports, service tickets. It's going all kinds of crazy, right? Every question just runs through huge amount of tokens. And in the agent world, this is becoming like a big problem. Like on average, the agent runs a recursive query 4 times. And we know by the time it runs the 10th query, it's 7 times more expensive, right? Now, now imagine this is just a human problem, a CEO asking it, right? So it's burning so much token just to figure out where the data is, what to actually pick up, multiply that by 5,000 leaders asking the same 10 questions. The bill at the end of the day, super ugly. And then the CFO asks the hard questions, right? Like, what am I getting out of this AI, right? So that's one, cost. Second one, same question, right? Different definitions and made up answers. We call this hallucination. Everybody knows about it. Now, assume after scanning all those tables, AI comes back and says, hey, I sold 12,400 units, for example, right? But really, I mentioned this before, but where did it come up with that 12,400? Right? Like, is it counting based on sales when the car is shipped to a dealer? Right? Marketing actually looks at cars when it's registered to a real buyer, right? Finance calculates sales when actually the revenue is booked. So there are three different numbers. Like the CEO doesn't have any heads or tails around where the data is actually coming from. And let's just assume she tries to dig deeper, right? And then AI tells them, hey, my sales are soft due to competition. But you know what? Where did that data come from? It may have pulled it from something that doesn't even exist with generative AI, right? The real reason might be that, hey, there's actually an issue with a charging issue with one of the trim levels. And by the way, the AI doesn't even have access to that system, right? The AI maybe has access to the call center complaints. But what about warranty claims? That sits in a different system. What about engineering notes? That sits in the fourth system. What about dealer service reports? You just spoke about like how do we exchange information? That sits in some sort of silo. AI only has access to one slice, right? And then it comes up with minor issues, right? And also there is security gaps that nobody's talking about, right? Let's say the AI system has information about finance and it has margin, right? And let's say the CEO gets information about margin, forwards it to a marketing department, and next time it's sitting in a marketing deck, right? And the other thing is just general context, right? When you talk about, well, how is my SUV performing? Right? If an SUV is a hybrid and it's comparing to a Rivian or a Tesla, it's actually a bad comparison because it doesn't have the context, right? And what's happening, by the way, all the time when people actually say AI pilots are stalling, in this instance, what's probably happening is the CEO and the CFO compare notes. They're actually not adding up. They all ask the same questions. They got different numbers. They escalate to the board. And Monday morning, the $40 million AI budget says, stop, we're not doing anything, right? And there's a collapse in trust, right? So really, I want to bring this down to like, this is one question we're talking about, just one CEO, multiple failure points, right? Every car maker today is scaling AI today, right? And it's actually running the same version of the problem everywhere. And in any other occupation, I would be like, why are we doing this? And but today, just because everybody's investing in AI, we're okay with this. So that's the challenge. Now, I want to go back to solution. I'm sure that's your next question. Now,
Yes.
let me run you through the same scenario with the semantic layer when AI agent has context of your data. How is our new SUV performing this quarter? Guess what? When you have a semantic layer, it already knows what SUV performance means. It knows where to look. It knows where to pull the data. AI doesn't have to scan for a needle in a haystack. It just gets a clean, small, governed answer like a first principle demand. Your computing cost today, 70 to 80% is waste. The CFO just stops worrying about this and talks about value, right? Like, and we spoke about the definitions, right? Units sold has one meaning in the semantic layer, not five different meanings across five different systems.
Mhm.
Same number. Whether CEO asks, whether the CFO asks, whether I ask, whether you ask, right? And then also the other intent is like you guys are speaking about disconnected data, consolidation, right? Right. It's very hard to consolidate data in one system. It takes years, even if it's like even possible, right? The whole point of semantic layer is you have multiple sources of data, you bring the business context out of it, and then you bring it connection downstream, right? The web of connections is what keeps the semantics layer like earns its keep essentially, right? And then we spoke about context, we spoke about everything else, but really semantic layer solves all those challenges that I mentioned, right? Whether it's marketing that's counting a different revenue, whether it's finance, right? One logic every time, understand the context, understand how your business is running so that the AI can actually focus on solving real problems and not just trying to figure out where to get my data from, right? That's not the question we need to have today.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I keep thinking back to what you said about definitions, right? Get those definitions right makes all the difference. We have a really good question from our good friend Nick McCracken in the chat. Everybody might be able to see it, but if they can't, it says, how might consumers' potential use of AI agents to enable vehicle shopping, etc., influence this overall topic? So we're talking about automakers and tier ones and dealers doing these projects. But I think it's an interesting question. As consumers get more sophisticated, what happens? We know as consumers all got smartphones, what changed inside the car because of that, right? We have lots of changes in the car because they have smartphones. But maybe Anoop, this is one that you might tackle,
Yeah, no,
which is,
this
as
is
you
certainly a
enable the
topic.
consumers, what does it mean for all this topic?
This is certainly a topic for another 1 hour discussion. But real quick, back in late 23, there was an ex-employee, ex-Twitter employee who was able to convince a chatbot on a dealer site to sell a Chevy Tahoe to him for $1, which cost us $70,000. So he basically used prompt injection and convinced the bot that it should agree to everything it asked for, and then it basically made it sell officially for $1. The sale didn't happen, of course, but it can be done, right? That, of course, was early days, but clearly there are multiple phases in car shopping, as we all know. I believe that the discovery phase, where you're looking for what car to buy, where to buy it from, that step can certainly be dramatically modified, and it's already happening. It'll change into either a bot or an agent doing that for a consumer, as opposed to a user going to multiple sites and looking at search results page and VDPs and submitting leads. The contacting the dealer to get a quote part, technically it can be done today, but I don't know if you'll get good responses back. So I'm doing some testing on that area. But I think at this point, it will take a long time before the actual transaction, the sales transaction itself, would go anywhere beyond in person at the dealership. That
Mhm.
touch and feel and the human relationship is still important.
Okay, great. Thank you. We just have a few minutes left, and what I want to think about is two things real quick. Asim mentioned CFOs and CEOs talking about what am I getting out of it. Anybody have any comment about ROI, how you measure all this, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
I can chime in here. I think
Go
there are
ahead.
two, like when I see the automotive market, and without naming names, there are companies who are digital native who have gone in and building from scratch, and they're ahead of your traditional automakers. Like, so the experience is vastly different from one to the other, and you can see the divide happening, right? And if I look at the health of the automotive market, like the automotive market is that they move humans, they move things, right? They're still going to happen. And as Simon Sinek, right? If you've read any of his books, he talks about it's not about winning or losing anymore. It's about how do you stay in the game, right? It's about your existence, if you will, right? And and you spoke about tariffs, you spoke about the war, like supply chain issues, right? Uh, the only real way, right, for automotive companies to get real advantage is to lean in with AI, right, with the technology, right, and then to really kind of increase the customer delight. The challenge right now is everybody's doing it. That's so like everybody's doing it, but I think most of them are not getting there for whatever reason, right? So everybody asks me what should I do on a Monday morning, right? And everybody's trying to boil the ocean, if you will, right? Like figure out a couple of things you want to solve right this year, right? After sales, Porsche, this is a great way to start. How do you actually increase your customer delight, right? Start slow, move fast, right? Prove out, right? A lot of corporations I'm still seeing is going through multi-year transformations. That's not the world we live in. We're living in like invest, get value every 6, 7 months. Really, this is not an automotive example, but if we're living in a world where Anthropic is pushing new stuff every 3 days, I can't even keep up. Like think about how do we get that kind of experience in the automotive world, right? Quick wins, like we wanna get customers experiences in a very quick way.
and the ones
Or
who do it right deliver, right? Like we have the example of Sonic in the white paper moving the per vehicle profit from eight nine
Hmm.
hundred dollars to $1,100, which is quite impressive. To your point, George, you can think of ROI in terms of the cost ROI. How can we extract most value with the least compute credits? You can think in terms of productivity. How quickly can you get to the insight? So the time from collection of data to the insight. You can think in terms of decision ROI. So is the insight leading from the decision, or is that just like one more nice report, nice to know, and then we move on, right? And then all this has to lead up to a true strategic ROI where you are putting your company at a competitive advantage relative to everybody else without, of course, blowing through your budget on expense
Yeah,
side.
sure. Yeah. Alan, you have a comment?
I'll end it with a very provocative thought, George. Taking a sort of the 30-year view of our industry, I see an interesting, challenging time ahead. The number of vehicles sold on the market could be challenging. Population growth, people are not having kids, having less immigration. In order to be successful, without that population growth, companies are going to need to figure out how to be more efficient and more productive. And I do believe AI is absolutely going to be the key to that. And so I think the ROI that's going to be necessary will actually be for survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
That to me is the future.
Super. Thank you for that point. I think that's a great place to end. And we're slightly over time. I appreciate everybody joining. Really, really interesting conversation. And we'll send the recording out to everybody after the meeting. So thanks very much. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Have a good weekend and take care. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.